Hi, I'm Johnny Miller. I'm the photographer behind the UnEqual Scenes photo project. I'm sitting here in Detroit in my grandmother's house. I'm stuck here because of coronavirus, and usually I live in Cape Town, South Africa. I moved there in 2012 to get a master's degree at University of Cape Town and just fell in love with the place. South Africa is a beautiful country. Cape Town specifically is a gorgeous city. There's beaches and mountains. But as a photographer, it's also really interesting because of the problematic nature of the built environment and that inequality manifested through spatial segregation that is so apparent when you land at the airport and sort of drive into the nice parts of town. You drive past all these shacks, all these really, really poor people, and then you get literally in 5 minutes to an area with like swimming pools and mansions. So it was always really weird for me because I grew up all over the country. My dad was in NOAA, so it was a government agency, and we moved all over the place. But we were always sort of like middle class, living in the suburbs. Typical maybe American growing up in the suburbs, playing Little League and going to school, riding my bike, I don't know, normal stuff. Never really had to deal with extreme poverty. And I have to say that, living in South Africa has not only made me a better photographer, it's made me a better person in the sense that I'm much more introspective and reflective about my own privilege and how that comes across in my project. So let me tell you a little bit about the project. It started in 2016. I had bought a drone, and a friend of mine who saw a video that I posted said, "Wow, I've never seen Table Mountain look like that before." And I thought, wow, okay, Table Mountain is this iconic feature of Cape Town, so to see it in a new way was really something big. And I realized that drones had the ability to change people's perspectives totally. And it was like a revelation. It was like the light bulb went off over my head. And I drove to this part of Cape Town that's very unequal, a community called Masapumalele. We would say it's a township, but you could call it a slum or ghetto or whatever. It's just a very poor area. But it was right next to like a really rich area, and I always thought it was weird. And so I took the drone there, and this is completely sort of just on a lark, put the drone in the air, flew over, thought, wow, that's an incredible photo. Took it, came back, landed, and put that photo onto Facebook. And that night, the photo went viral. So people started commenting, people started sharing, journalists started calling me, people started asking me when the next photos were coming out. It was like this extreme pent-up desire to see more photos of inequality. And I did. I took more photos of inequality. So the project now is spanned all over South Africa. Some of the images in the show are done with a really high-resolution Hasselblad camera that was loaned to me for the duration of a short duration for the project, and then some with DJI drones, consumer drones, not only in South Africa, but I've been to Tanzania, Kenya, Mexico, America, and India. Now coronavirus is kind of putting a hamper on travel, but I'm hoping to go to Brazil fairly soon. And then this could go on, honestly, for my whole career because there's so much inequality. But I think that, focusing again on America, doing more in America, and then also potentially Europe is on my radar. I'm passionate about inequality. I'm passionate about creating a more healthy, more prosperous, more fair world for everyone. A lot of people consider inequality to be somehow destructive, like it's hampering growth, or it's sort of taking away riches that were got by legit means and giving it to people who don't deserve them. I just don't believe that. I think that the way that wealth is distributed is generally a rigged game. Your privilege that you're born into and the privileges that you acquire throughout your life are by and large a product of circumstance, your birth. And not only that, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not a zero-sum game, and there's lots of economics professors. I'm fortunate enough to know some of them personally and to be a fellow at the Atlantic Fellowship for Social and Economic Equity at London School of Economics that have shown that actually a more fair world is a more prosperous world. So businesses have more customers when everyone is making more money, for example. And I think we're seeing now with the coronavirus pandemic, especially in America, is that when you have populations that are generally sicker and more poor than other populations, they are a problem for everyone. It's not just those communities. And so the idea that we're all tied together in society in a civic bond really is something that's fundamentally missing from a lot of the inequality debates. And I think that it's an opportunity for people who are passionate about this to put their perspective forward. There's, in my mind, as a communicator and as a photographer, a lack of relevance when you talk about inequality. It's like, oh, that's not my problem, right? That's potentially the case for poverty. If you're talking about ending poverty, maybe it's not your problem if you're rich. If it's inequality, it certainly is your problem, even if you're on the richer end of the spectrum. And I just think that that can be done in a way that isn't as divisive as our contemporary political rhetoric is right now. I think there's an opportunity for moderates to put forward reasonable and rationally toned arguments that offer a solution for people whose primary motivation is either making more money, so business and economics, or preserving their own wealth. Because there's a variety of ways that we can sort of preserve that wealth and then use it to grow wealth for other people. And there's a variety of solutions for that. UnEqual Scenes has always, in my mind, been a platform for those conversations to take place. I have a long way to go with the project and with the community, but from the very beginning, and I put this on the very first photo text, the caption for the very first photo, was that I wanted this to be a conversation. I wanted this to provoke a conversation on inequality. I wanted people just to talk about it. And it's been, if I do say so, wildly successful at getting people to talk about inequality. So from that perspective, as a photographer, I'm very happy to have created something that resonates. African Drone is a NGO that I co-founded with Code for Africa. Code for Africa is an NGO itself, and they're based in Africa in a variety of different headquarters throughout Africa. I work in the Cape Town office. I'm a fellow at Code for Africa, which means that I work to promote their aims through UnEqual Scenes primarily, but also through African Drone, like I said, which is an NGO that I co-founded, and our mission is using drones for good. So we want to build a network of drone pilots in Africa who use drones for good. We have excellent partners doing drone mapping, doing survey enumerations, even delivery, thermal scans, anti-poaching work, journalism. There's so many cool ways that you can use drones. And I truly believe that drones are a democratizing technology. They're really a game changer. So they're not only a leapfrogging technology, which means that, Africa has really poor infrastructure. It's got the worst infrastructure for the continent as any other continent. And there's a variety of problems like high cost of transport per road kilometer, and a variety of other things, and borders and legislative hurdles that make it difficult to sort of trade amongst African countries, that drones could really be a game changer in. And if you do it properly, if you invest in STEM, if you get people to manufacture their own drones, all these things are happening, by the way. We had the African Drone Forum in Kigali in February, this February 2020. We were a partner together with the government of Rwanda and the World Bank. And the African Drone Forum, which is what it called, was specifically tailored to bring together all those elements, to talk and to figure out how can we make an equitable environment for the use of drones for good, to speed up this sort of leapfrogging technology, and to make and sort of to catalyze the capital that pre-exists in Africa, instead of relying on outside experts and expertise to have to come in and do it for you, basically. But I also think that they're a democratizing technology, which is slightly different. And I think that because imagine a world, and this was only 10, maybe less years ago, where you would have had to get into a helicopter or a plane to shoot unequal scenes. Now, me, has the opportunity of buying a drone. At the time, I had a DJI Inspire drone, which it cost me about $3,000, but drones are much cheaper than that now. And you have the ability to fly anywhere you want and to explore the world that is your world, right? To see your community, your house, yourself from above. That was a privilege that not too long ago was very expensive and very controlled. And the democratizing nature of drones means that it returns the power to humans to dictate their own narrative. That's incredibly powerful. I think it's just as powerful as cell phones with a camera on them, or maybe access to internet was in generations, years past. I guess it's not generations. It feels like it is since the internet came out. In Africa, I will say, though, the regulatory environment for flying drones is very strict, much stricter than in America, and that's just South Africa. In Africa in general, obviously each nation has its own laws, but there are extremely difficult hurdles to overcome to be able to fly legally. And I think that that's a direct result from the ability of the drone to collect information. That scares a lot of people. So we're working on that as African Drone. I'm working on that with UnEqual Scenes to showcase uses of drones for good, and to allow people to see that it's something that's in everyone's best interest. So I've never actually felt physically threatened anywhere that I've done this project. I will say, as a photographer, I work slightly differently with the drone than I would in another, maybe more documentary situation, which is the fact that because of the nature of the drone and the way that it collects images, it's remote, right? So you've got something in the sky that's untethered, there's no real clear connection between the operator, me, and the drone itself. And that, to be frank, upsets a lot of people. I think when you have any sort of remote surveillance, photography, image capture, you introduce an aspect of uncertainty as to the intentions of the photographer that makes the job of a drone photographer almost impossible to do at the scale of a region or a city without making it so expensive that it would never get done. So it's a catch-22. If you want to showcase how a city looks, and in some of my photos, for example, the photo on the cover of Time magazine, there might be 10,000 people in that photo, in those individual shots. There's so many of them. And to engage with every single one of them would be impossible. And so the nature of taking these sorts of images is just different. And from the point of view of being an ethical photographer, but still getting the job done, it's a line that I felt I have to err on the side of moving more quickly and engaging less with people on the ground with these types of images than I otherwise would if I wanted individual stories. I don't think that's unique to UnEqual Scenes. I think if you talk to Edward Burtynsky, or if you talk to George Steinmetz, or if you talk to other famous aerial photographers, they would say the same thing, that aerial photography by its nature is different and you have to approach it differently. So I've never been threatened. I have had to move quickly. And a lot of the places I photograph, especially in South Africa, are very dangerous. South Africa has a very high crime rate, all types of crime. And so I have to plan my routes very carefully, my route in, my fly location, my flights, and then my exit points, so that I'm not lingering and I'm not showing my equipment off to everyone around me ostentatiously. And there's a variety of ways that I figured out how to do that. I don't always have the luxury of having someone else with me, but when I do, it's much easier because they can watch my back or whatever. But if I'm flying by myself, then it becomes difficult, because you can imagine it takes a lot of concentration to fly a drone. So I've had to learn a lot of things on the fly. It's much different than shooting photos in a controlled situation. UnEqual Scenes has been lucky enough to get a lot of press, and I've been featured in Time on the cover, National Geographic twice, Newsweek, a lot of newspapers around the world, a lot of activists and professors and students, and even the UN and the World Bank have used my images extensively. It's been amazing as a photographer. It was overwhelming at first, I have to admit. I'd never had anything get so big. And so it was overwhelming to both balance being a spokesperson for the message of inequality, and then also dealing with all the sort of, I'd say, practicalities of having a project grow so quickly. So how do you want to license the images to like a person who wants to show them? How do you want to set up your exhibition? How do you want to print the images? How do you want to give back to the community? How do you want to take more images? I kind of had to learn all of that on my own and do it in the glare of a media spotlight in a way. That was the first 6 to 12 months of the project, specifically in 2016. And I've learned a lot. I've been lucky enough to I have fellowships with the Atlantic Fellowship and BMW. I'm a responsible leader, and then also the UN and Code for Africa, which has helped me grow as a person. I said before that I've grown as a photographer, but I've also grown as a person. I've become a lot more introspective. I've become a lot more reflective. I've become a lot savvier as a photographer and a small business owner. And I've also become sharper in my messaging, so that I know more now when I'm asked to speak about UnEqual Scenes, what to say to get my message across in the quickest amount of time. One of the interesting things about getting all that press is that you're then put in a position to be able to exert influence. And that's a really interesting place to be, because now you have a responsibility to say the right thing and to research the options, so that when you present yours, you know, or you can at least defend it as the best option. That is something that I'm lucky enough to have now, that position. And I'm not overstating my importance, but when I speak, for example, to crowds about inequality, they take my word more seriously than they used to 4 years ago. And I want to be responsible. I want to be a responsible leader and use my opinions that I've learned from the inequality discussions to reflect on things like coronavirus, or to reflect on things like global politics or economics at large, or even ethics in photography. So it's actually made me adaptable to lend sort of an intellectual component to opinions that I otherwise would have just been guessing at or feeling. Specifically to do with coronavirus, I think that this pandemic has shone a light on American inequalities, and it's definitely shown a light on South African inequalities that I think people knew. I think people knew that these communities were already suffering, that they were already unequal, that people with lower access to healthcare and lower average income and higher rates of incarceration and higher rates of bias would be faring less well with this pandemic. But every example helps, in a way, the cause. And we need a variety of actors in that cause. We need a spectrum of people pushing to convince people in power. And people in power could be your parents. It could be the average voter. It could be you. That we need to change the system. That we need to make the world more equitable in order to survive. I see climate change as a type of inequality. I see gender and racial biases as a type of inequality. And then obviously there's wealth, income, opportunity inequalities that take place in a variety of subsets of different populations in many countries around the world. And inequality is actually increasing. Inequality is increasing in the United States, not decreasing. In South Africa, the levels are so high that even if they're decreasing by a little bit, it won't make a difference for generations to come. And in some parts of Europe where there was declining inequality, that's now changed. So we thought that the financial crisis, and by we, I mean activists, thought that the financial crisis might provide an opportunity for us to sort of have a moment and reflect on changing incentives, changing reward structures at a high level to make our world more equitable, to make people's incomes a little more valued based on inflation and based on previous rates of value for lower and middle income people, specifically in the United States that I'm talking about. But it hasn't happened. Really what the financial crisis taught us was that the people who are the richest have really effective means of keeping themselves rich. And so you've seen an increase in extreme income inequality, wealth inequality, that we have to fix because it's sending us into a two-tiered population where there will be extreme wealth by a very small number of people. I think the Oxfam came out with their latest, which was 8 billionaires own as much as the bottom 50% of the world's population as far as wealth. That was this year's statistic at Davos. And if you can't figure out a way to fix that, it's not only a problem for poor people, it's a problem for rich people too. And so how do we generate a message? As a photographer, how do I communicate a message that not only gets people to see the problem, but acknowledge that it's bad for them and then move them towards action? So that's kind of the 3-step process that I think as a photographer, I'm trying to implement. I'm trying to get people to go through in order to come out to an outcome that I feel is important that we come to as a world population, not even a national population. I'm fortunate enough to have one foot in both countries and to see things from an outside perspective. Sometimes living in America, it's quite myopic. All the media that we produce is focused on America. If you get international news, it seems foreign, more than just its obvious nature of being foreign, kind of funny, strange in a way. I feel living here, I've lived here for the last 2 months, watching the nightly news, that all of a sudden my South African life is becoming less relevant. And that feeling, I think, isn't a good thing for a citizen to have, a global citizen to have, right? To feel less connected. And so by having a foot in both places, on both continents, I feel like hopefully I have an ability to sort of pull together some sort of interesting perspective on global inequality in a way that's useful. I just want to thank Marianne for offering me this opportunity to exhibit at the Turchin Center. We met in 2017 at Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and that was an incredible experience. Her and Christy Havranek were the sort of teachers at a session that I participated in, which was really, really useful. And the connections that I made there were also extremely useful. And it was just a lot of fun, honestly. I'm so excited to come to Appalachian State. I'm so excited to have my work shown in Boone at the Turchin Center. And I hope that everyone really enjoys the show. But more than that, I really hope that people come away with an interest in learning more about inequality and feeling empowered that they actually can do something about it.